tell us some stories about their work organizing business leaders in Vermont and Colorado. Emmy Liss, who is Five Boroughs' amazing childcare policy advisor, is going to moderate.
Hello again, everyone. It's great to see you all again. So we've heard the view from Albany, the view from New York City, from DC, and now from the rest of the nation. So taking a step back to sort of Five Boroughs' engagement with business leaders broadly over the past year and a half, as Grace reflected earlier this morning, we heard a lot of interest as we started to bring Five Boroughs' childcare report to business leaders. Folks were excited, alarmed, wanted to get more involved, but didn't necessarily know what it would look like for business to lend its support, specifically on the policy side of childcare. And as we started to look at examples from around the country, we saw in so many different places that where ambitious new policies had been passed, new investments had been made in childcare, business had been at the center of it. It's not a surprise, but it was a pattern we continued to see everywhere from Sonoma County, California, to Charlotte, North Carolina, all across Texas, Vermont, as we'll hear a bit about. And so as we think about what it would look like for New York to engage business in a different way and for New York business leaders to come to the table on childcare, we thought it would be really valuable to look at the playbooks that others have used and to take some lessons from them. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by two wonderful leaders. Allie Richards, who's joining us from Let's Grow Kids in Vermont, where they've just completed an incredible 10-year campaign and won one of the most ambitious public investments in childcare in the country. And business leaders were really at the core of that strategy. And I'm also thrilled to be joined by Nicole Reel from Executives Partnering to Invest in Children, or EPIC, which has been working in Colorado for the last 15 years to, on two fronts, engage business leaders. First, help them provide childcare to their employees in innovative ways, and also to engage in policy. EPIC's work has gone national, and they've partnered with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and are sharing their insights across the country. So would love to jump into conversation. Nicole, especially since EPIC has been at this for a while now, would love if you could just reflect on where the idea came first to start organizing business leaders in Colorado, how that came together, and how it's evolved over the last decade and a half.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be in New York City. So EPIC was founded about 16 years ago by a group of CEOs and entrepreneurs, folks who were leading companies in the private sector primarily, who really understood and recognized the economic imperative of them as business leaders leaning in to address solutions around childcare and early education for the workforce. Because obviously, number one, it impacted their goals as business leaders in retaining and attracting the very best workforce possible. But they also knew that making sure kids were getting the best start in life was also going to meet their long-term goals for their company in making sure they had a great workforce in the future as well. They also recognized that childcare and early education in general was very complicated and a little bit messy, to say the least. And so they wanted to create an organization that could really serve as its implementation partner and voice in that effort. Executives are very busy, they have very little time, and they have lots of priorities on their plates, as I'm sure you all know. And so EPIC was really created to be that organization that could serve as the voice for the business community and really curate and cultivate opportunities for the business community to step in and take action. So we turn the very messy into very easy, if you will, for the business community. I always say it's my job to turn 4 hours of an early childhood meeting or conversation into 4 minutes of what a CEO needs to know and what that means for them in terms of how they take action. So on the implementation side, we've worked very closely with employers to really help them think about how to implement childcare solutions in their communities, in their companies that make sense and really help them be successful at that effort. As Emmy mentioned, we've worked with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to create the Employer Childcare Navigator tool. It's employerchildcarenavigator.org, and it's basically a democratized resource of our knowledge and expertise around how companies can start to step into addressing childcare for their workforce. We have about 80 business executives who are part of our network in Colorado Colorado who work very closely with us in this work, and really step in and lean in with their influence and their names and their expertise as well. We've worked with about 60 employers that employ over 170,000 employees so far in our work, and really approach it from kind of a mission-driven, unbiased perspective, and just making sure that they can solve those needs and address them as they need to. On the flip side of that, we've got the public policy piece, which has also been really important and really was one of the biggest pieces of work that the business leaders wanted to dive into first with EPIC. So over the years, they started off with wanting to do two things. They wanted to create an employer toolkit for implementing best practices, but they also wanted to work on improving a tax credit that we had in Colorado to incentivize the private sector and other donors to support the childcare industry. That tax credit was successfully revamped, I will say, and we continue to keep that tax credit alive. It brings in about $60 million a year in donations each year in Colorado now, and so we've been instrumental in that. We have a lobbyist. We develop policy. We support and promote policy. We have business leaders who show up to testify on legislation. We hold roundtables with the governor, our congressional district members, and we do a little bit of policy now at the federal level too, just because we have subject matter expertise that can really lead, help advise that. We've also supported things like passing free full-day kindergarten in Colorado, passing free full-day universal preschool in Colorado. We were heavily involved in both the design of those programs and the campaigns themselves, including funding the campaigns. So we've really been able to step in with the business community and help create these things and take action. Developing a public-private partnership office in Colorado where we've worked collectively with public sector partners to inventory publicly owned real estate that can be repurposed for things like housing and childcare, and really stepping into the role of helping to implement and design these public-private partnership solutions where we can co-locate things like affordable housing and childcare for our communities. And lots of other legislation that has looked like things like tax exemptions for the childcare industry, tax credits for early childhood professionals, refundable tax credits now for up to $4,000 a year if you're a teaching professional in this field in Colorado. So lots of different ways that we have utilized our public policy prowess, I will call it, with the business community to really address these things. And as I said, it gets messy, right? I'm going to take a quote from the Savannah Bananas, Jessie Cole. You have to get through the messy to get through the great. And I think that's so true with childcare. And so it's really fun working with business leaders in the business community to address this. And like I said, it's our job just to make sure that we can curate those opportunities and make that super easy for them to step into.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Allie, can you talk a bit about how Let's Grow Kids first brought business leaders to the table as a coalition on childcare in Vermont?
Absolutely. It's so great to be here. So I'm Allie, and just for a little background, my job ends in 2 weeks by design. We were a time-limited 10-year campaign for high-quality affordable childcare in the state of Vermont, and we passed, as Emmy said, one of the most expansive bills in the country 2 years ago. And I just want to tell you, thank you. You won a clout. Thank you. I so appreciate that. What the heck did it do? Because this is an aspirational model that I think could be a motivational factor. We passed a 0.44% payroll tax that is pushing money into the sector that goes to the hands of early educators to actually pay for the service, and for Vermonters who now can afford childcare. And, we're seeing so let me just remind you, 650,000 people in the state of Vermont, $5 billion state budget. It's smaller than like a block here. So with that in mind, we've opened over 100 new childcare programs, 1,700 new spaces. Half of those, by the way, are family childcare homes in rural places that never have had childcare before. 1,400 new jobs have been created. 4,700 Vermont families are paying affordable childcare, free up to 185% of poverty. You get a heavy subsidy up to 575% of poverty. So a family of four making $200,000, as you heard before, this is everyone's issue up and down the income spectrum. So just to ground us, we did this thing in Vermont. And I'm so excited to be here because you have the bones of it here, knowing who is here and who sat up here. You got everything you need, folks. And the thing is, if we are this is messy, this is hard and complicated, but if we're gonna solve this borough by borough, state by state, it's going to take two key things that we agree on. One is that public investment is the key part of the solution. That's why we don't have capacity, by the way. Great, by the way, if you want to streamline your license regulations, great. But that's not why. It's a bankrupting business model. So the minute we realize that, we all realize that, you've heard it a million times today, parents can't afford to pay more, early educators can't afford to pay less. It's a bankrupting business model. That's why we don't have enough of it. It's not high quality. So enter business. The two things we need to understand is, one, revenue, public investment. Two, businesses have all the power in the world to fix this, folks, because revenue is the solution. So in Vermont, businesses didn't just like sit on the sidelines and cheer. They literally led this, which is also important because they understand how it works. In their businesses, in your businesses, they say we identify a problem, identify the solution, and then fix it until it's done. Like, don't do a half loaf. You know what I mean? Because that's not going to get you what you're going for, the return on investment and all the outcomes. And so enter businesses. We knew in our campaign that once we all identified public investment as the solution, businesses were the only messengers. And so we had a nuclear core of top businesses. Again, all the folks I've heard, all great ideas. By the way, having an on-site childcare, amazing. But it's a gateway to being at the policy table, because you do not fix this without policy. It doesn't have to be state, could be municipal, could be city, but you got to get at the policy table. And so what we did in Vermont was we get a bunch of businesses who were like, oh yeah, workforce development crisis, no one's coming to save us, we have to do this ourselves. And then they're like, so put me in, coach, like I will fix it, right? Which is amazing. And what we had to do was let them fix it, get their hands dirty. And so we had a nuclear core of these like top businesses in Vermont, really representative of, solar, one-man carpenter, tourism, restaurant, nice sort of diversity, who just got dirty with it, with our former tax commissioner. She moderated this, and basically they understood by the end exactly what was wrong with childcare, that public investment was the solution on their own terms, and then basically said, okay, now we have to change public policy. So they became the messengers. And so peer-to-peer is critical in business, and networks, right? So it wasn't just the usual suspects either. We had moderate and conservative business chambers and networks, and people started falling out of their chairs when they came to the State House and said, usually we're here to tell you not to tax us. Today, we're actually here to tell you to please tax us, specifically us. And that's why we passed a 0.44% payroll tax, because they were the great messengers. And that is why we have this law in Vermont, because as a business community, they actually went and said, we need this.
In terms of getting them there, sort of as you said, they needed to first recognize that public investment was the answer. Were there specific data points or analyses or particular influencers, as it were, who helped business leaders come to that conclusion and kind of rally around this?
Yeah. By the way, having the comptroller understand this the way he understands it is a really big deal. And also I feel like he's reading our mail in Vermont, because everything he said was right and what we did. And so we did a longitudinal analysis, like everyone and their mothers have done on childcare. And guess what? It left every single person cold. The legislature was like, literally, don't come here and tell us that in 25 years, we will have solved poverty, because of this. Wrong pocket savings. We don't have a lifetime. We don't have all this money to save all this money. So we had to not do that. We took our longitudinal study and went home. And then we did an econometrics analysis. It worked. And so what Brad said that really got my attention was like, you lost 19% of your families with young kids, and this would cost like $3.2 billion. I would bet you, and you can do this calculation easily, that you could recoup more than that 3.2 billion if you just got some of those 19% back. So we did the econometrics analysis and said, you make this investment, how much will it, what's the stimulus-like effect on the economy? I have to say stimulus-like effect because the economists get mad at me. It's not an actual stimulus, but it has the exact same effect acutely, immediately. So we did basically, if you make this investment, how many Vermonters go back to work? How many Vermonters can find and afford childcare? How many jobs does that create? So the primary, sort of secondary, tertiary economic benefits of childcare. And guess what? Even just one dimension of that paid for the entire investment of the 0.44%. So for example, if we had 5,000 people, mostly educated moms who wanted to be in jobs that they couldn't be because of childcare, they went back to work, that alone paid for the entire public investment in childcare in Vermont. So that was the data that not only turned heads with business community, but turned heads with the lawmakers. And I'll just say, we had this cold day in January, the beginning of session, when we passed this bill. And 10 business people came in and said, literally text me, this is why it makes sense. And they actually brought their budgets. And they said, and this is what's going to change everything. Okay, this is how much my bottom line is. If I paid a 0.44% payroll tax, it would cost me this. I would recoup that cost in 4 months if I just hire this one vacancy back. Then I'll pay more in taxes as a business, my employees will pay more in taxes, they'll have more money to spend, and we're all gonna be happier. And that's what totally changed the dialogue and gave cover to people like your governor and all the lawmakers to actually put their butts on the line and pass a new revenue. Nobody wants to do that, but you need to create the authorizing environment, and the business community has the power to do that in a really effective way.
Nicole, as you look at other states, other communities around the country and talk to business leaders, what do what other lessons would you share? What do you see, either similar points to what Allie saw in Vermont with business leaders and what got them on board, or lessons from places that maybe have different political or economic dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, so many areas, in our communities, in our states, in our country are so different. I think, from a population standpoint, from an economy standpoint. So I think it is really important to get specific when it comes to the local context and what that means for employers and for the local community. I agree. I think these big numbers, billions of dollars, right? It's hard for people to really wrap their minds around what that actually means. But when you get specific about what that means for an airport being able to keep people flying and operating. Has anyone flown through Denver International Airport? Okay, yeah. It's a major hub. It's the sixth busiest airport in the world right now, and we're working with them on a childcare project. It's a really big pain in the butt when you can't appropriately staff an airport that needs 40,000 workers in it. And so I think helping employers or sites understand what it means to their business when people can show up to work, when they can be productive, when they're not calling out because they can't find childcare or don't have access to that. When you think about the difference in tax base to local governments because of this stimulus-like effect. I'm going to start using that. And what that means. We also know that, I think to the point that you made earlier, business has just a huge amount of credibility behind it, very influential. Business trades on credibility. And so it's really important to get those leading business associations and partners to the table. They don't have to do the messy work, but they do need to put their names and their organizations and their reputations out there to really make a difference in this work moving forward. And I think, that makes all the difference. I'll also say, I think it's important to make sure that, I think childcare, there can be a lot of problems to address all of a sudden, all at once, and it gets very overwhelming. It's okay to start specific, and it's okay to be iterative in that journey. And I think, as we've done a lot of work in Colorado, that's one thing that we've really tried to focus on is, okay, what's the one thing we're going to focus on right now with business leaders? What can we do? Let's tackle that. Okay, that's done. What's next? Business is very action oriented. They want to dig in and sink their teeth into something. They have opinions too about design and public policy and what that looks like, right? A lot of our business leaders who work with are I'm not an ATM machine. I actually have thoughts about what this should look like from a design perspective. And so there are great ways to get business leaders involved and make sure that they can also influence the design and what that looks like and help support these movements moving forward.
Can I just add to that? I totally agree. And that's the thing, not only they can help make it work, because they are at the table and they should be if it's revenue, but they can also make sure it's going to work because they can help influence, they can have a seat at the policy table, which is important. The idea of simplifying this is so critical. I remember one of my board members who joined our board because she was a head of a twin craft manufacturing skincare company. And she figured out this problem as a savvy person, was I have to fix this. And I literally can't make skincare products with my manufacturing, business. If I don't have people here and they can't be here because of childcare, how do I fix this? And so, they're like, you have to talk to, Let's Throw Kids campaign. And she's like, Allie, I make soap. I'm not in the childcare business. And I was like, you don't have to be. Let's pay into something. She's like, I wish I could just pay into something to fix it for everyone systemically. And I was like, great, then lead the policy charge. And then she and others in the business community got really deep and dirty in those details and sort of became evangelists. And what they could do then is go to their networks, go to their peers. They had house parties, they had parties at their, break rooms, and they could say, look, you trust me. I have a good reputation. I'm a savvy business person. I've done the homework. I've dug deep. I understand what the problem is. I understand what the solution is. So what questions do you have? And how can I sign you up to endorse this campaign? And so we actually did a grassroots as well as a grass tops kind of peer-to-peer influence as far as building the movement of businesses in Vermont. And we had hundreds of businesses sort of endorse the campaign, and then they stayed involved and then they shared their stories. So, you can sort of mix the grassroots and grass tops organizing together in that way.
You touched exactly what I was going to ask about next, which is the sort of peer-to-peer effect and the sort of snowball effect that it feels like you had in Vermont, and I think we've seen in other places where enough business leaders come to the table that it brings everyone, and it does in some ways feel like we're at the beginning of this tipping point here in New York. You referenced we have kind of all the political ingredients. If you think back to sort of those early moments when you were building the business support, Nicole, the work you've done over the last 15 years to get more and more business leaders in Colorado on board, how have you harnessed those tipping point moments and really kept business leaders with you through these political fights?
You go first.
There in the business community, there are certainly some of those, what I might call titans of industry, right? And heavily influential individuals, whether they're leading, a business association or a roundtable type organization, or they're leading a company and maybe they're a well-known entrepreneur and CEO and someone who's been very successful. I think you only need a few of those who are, really key champions to really take this up as something that they want to lead the charge with. And the most important thing they can do is to ask their colleagues to join the effort and jump in, right? I think that's where that credibility piece comes into play. We still have a lot of our founders involved with Epic today, and they still care very much about this mission, right? But it was lots of different people from different industries, right? CEOs of hospital systems and an owner of a Major League Baseball team and the person who invented Hot Pockets, right? And all sorts of random business leaders from different industries who said, this is important and this matters to our business, it matters to our boardrooms and our shareholders, and it matters to our employees and our communities. It's tied to brand value. This is the thing that we need to do for all those reasons. And they still do it today, but their colleagues will listen to them for sure.
Yeah, we have a demographic crisis in Vermont. We will not be a sustainable state if we do not turn our demographics around. And so the business community understands that. And what we help do is sort of connect the dots to workforce development crisis, demographic crisis. What are the key levers that are really going to be, at our fingertips? And this is one, I heard another speaker say that earlier, this is actually a simple solution. Unfortunately, it's about money because that's actually hard to move money around, but it's actually immediate, right? It's an immediate lever for these key problems. So I really recommend, again, putting business in the front, because they were able to say this isn't some sort of even partisan. This is a very, very bipartisan issue, which is a huge gift. We actually had all the Dems, all the progs, a bunch of Republicans, a bunch of independents, and our sole libertarian vote for this bill, and then vote to override our very popular Republican governor's veto. And again, the only reason why he vetoed it was because his legacy is no new taxes and fees, even though he really, really understood this issue. Again, I would give the business community full credit for us getting to that point. But, it was really about having the business lead and show this was a data-driven, real strategy, and then stay engaged through the implementation enough to understand that we pulled the lever and it was working. So we actually did a Courage in Action tour, and we engaged a bunch of businesses in that after the bill passed to start showing that it was really working. So that, because I will say a big I guess, reluctance in the business community to do this is that a big part of the solution is government. And a lot of them were actually skeptical about government's ability to do something really efficiently and really well. And so keeping them on board through some of the implementation, and then they were the ones sharing their stories, that's really why this is going to work and why it is working in Vermont and why it's going to stick. And they were able to sort of say, hey, we've already seen the 0.44% payroll tax actually is not the straw that's breaking the camel's back for us. We know it's all going to childcare and it's working, and we're seeing all of our employees save all this money. We're seeing, our vacancies get filled. So I think keeping them engaged, at least, and through the implementation too, as key leaders and sharing their stories, and it gets people sticking with childcare has to be an essential priority from a political standpoint, and it hasn't been forever. It's finally emerging as such. And so that's like the first key, is that childcare, has to be coming out of politicians' mouths, has to be seen as that top priority. And again, the businesses can help you, sustain that.
I think my favorite part of the Vermont story, and one that I've repeated to many people, some of them who are here, is the fact that you had business not just as a passive supporter, signing letters, appearing at events, but that you actually had them come out and help override a veto that was out of concern that they wouldn't want to tax, and they were there to say, we actually do, which I think is just such a powerful story. As we wrap up, I would love if you could each reflect on, as you think about where we are in our journey, there's a committed, I think, coalition of the willing here who want to bring business leaders to the table. There are willing business leaders who want to be at the table. What's our next step to move this forward in New York?
I can't wait to see what y'all do. You have everyone lined up, and I think what you need is like a cohesive coalition. Because what we were able to do at Let's Grow Kids was just like keep everyone on track. There are disagreements about some of the policy details, and so just having a sort of umbrella to the coalition that helps you understand the goal, renew the goal, keep people focused on the goal, do it again, rinse, repeat. I think it's really important to have, and I don't know if that's statewide or if that's 5-borough wide or from the city, but I really think that's the key, is you have to have all this organizing towards a specific policy goal. Again, public investment is the key piece of that. There are other details though. So having a container for all that energy would be critical. And I actually heard some folks on the stage today that sound like they can serve in that capacity. So you have to sort of marry the grassroots organizing, the business leadership, and those policy details together. And then you have it all. And I would highly recommend some sort of econometrics analysis to make that point super clear, because I think that will bring a lot more business folks onto the policy side of this.
Yeah, I mean, Ellie, I think you said it best, right? This is, there's a big piece around the voices, and I think the momentum that needs to be built, and I think has largely been built here based on what we've heard today. There's definitely this component of the how, and like the container where that messy needs to live in order to make it easy for business to weigh in and engage, and I think that's totally possible here too. And I think the last thing I'll say here too is, I mean, we obviously, in the business community, there are lots of hot topics right now, right? I mean, AI, return to office, obviously competitiveness across industries and across cities is also a big hot topic, right? And we've heard about families leaving New York City and cities really struggling to make sure that they're keeping families there. That's an important tax base. So I think it's also important to make sure, like you said, to tie that to, like what is the context locally and those driving efforts around, keeping families, bringing families back, keeping the workforce that's needed, making sure that even the short-term and the long-term workforce goals that business leaders have can be met and can be easily identified in that effort too.
And my dream would be like on-site childcare becomes a competitive advantage. It's not the solution, because it doesn't systemically fix the issue. It doesn't create a pipeline of early educators, doesn't change the affordability, quotient, right? So the public policy piece, and then all of a sudden, you can rock and roll by having incentives and other pieces for on-site childcare to increase capacity, and then make you more competitive, but I feel like it's that connection to policy that sounds like you all are on the cusp of, and that's very exciting to see, because I feel like we're just trying to move the country in that direction and get that agreement that this is going to be public investment.
Thank you both so much. for joining us and bringing these lessons in from outside. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes for our next panel.
Thank you.